Resources for more than 30 years and also represents the state of Utah on the Colorado River Commission. Next to him is Ron Thompson, the General Manager of the Washington County Water Conservancy District, who has served in that position for almost 40 years and has also served in various leadership roles in Colorado River organizations, including serving as the past president of the Colorado River Water Users Association. So today we're going to go through and have them do a brief presentation, and then afterwards we're going to open up the floor to Q&A. And so if there's not any additional announcements, oh, one other thing, is David Clark in here? I wanted to recognize and thank David Clark. I think most of you are here because of this man over here who has lassoed you up, and we sure appreciate David helping us with the outreach and the invitations, and wanted to recognize him for his efforts as well. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Don Osler. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. It's a pleasure to be able to be here and talk about the Colorado River with you. I think my job is to talk about the Colorado River in general, and these two gentlemen will fill you in with a lot of detailed specifics about the Colorado River supply here. So a few questions or comments regarding the Colorado River in general. Extremely valuable and important resource in the West. Maybe I'm getting too close to this, I'm not sure. Can you hear okay? The Colorado River supplies water to nearly 40 million people. Most of those people don't live actually in the Colorado River Basin. There's a lot of water from the Colorado River that is conveyed via pipeline and canal outside of the basin to the point of use, such as the Los Angeles Basin, Salt Lake Basin, the Great Basin, the Denver area, the Albuquerque area, and water is transported all the way to Phoenix and Tucson, which is a long ways away from the main stem of the Colorado River, although technically those are in the basin. So a lot of use of the water. It's conveyed a long ways for a lot of its uses. But it's a good-sized basin. It's not big compared to the Mississippi River, but 246,000 square miles. It covers 7 states, which we'll talk about in a minute, and the country of Mexico. And within the Colorado River, we have the primary reservoirs, Lake Mead and Lake Powell, provide most of the storage in the basin. Lake Powell is about 24 million acre feet, and Lake Mead is about 26 million acre feet, so about 50 million acre feet of storage in those two principal reservoirs. Although there are many other reservoirs, they're all a lot smaller, provide valuable storage for water users, but it's not a lot of volume compared to the total. So a few comments about how is the water of the Colorado River shared. You've already heard that there's a great deal of use of the Colorado River with 40 million people, 5.5 million acre feet of agriculture that uses Colorado River water. Very important source of supply for a lot of people. But what we call the law of the Colorado River, it defines the apportionment of the river. How is the water used? Who gets it? How is it managed? And probably the most significant part of that law of the river is the 1922 Colorado River Compact. That one most people have heard of because it's talked about a lot. And one of the main things that compact did is it divided the water use between the upper basin and the lower basin. The upper basin is Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico, parts of New Mexico. And the lower basin is Nevada, Arizona, California, and the country of Mexico. An important thing that the 1922 Compact did is that it divided this water use in perpetuity. Both basins were developing at different rates, and the upper basin was developing much slower than the lower basin. So it provided a guarantee, regardless of how fast the lower basin developed, that this amount of water would be available for use in the upper basin. And then the other two important acts, the 1928 Boulder Canyon Act and the 1948 Upper Colorado River Basin Project Act, it divided the water amongst the states. I think the lower basin actually had to have a lawsuit to finally settle how they would share the water in the lower basin. But the 1948 compact divided the water amongst the states in the upper basin. So these are the states in the Colorado River Basin, and this provides an indication of the allocations. I'm colorblind, but it looks like the gray states are the upper basin states. So portions of all of these states are in the upper basin. And you note that it's divided on the basis of percentage of the available supply, with Wyoming 14%, Utah 23%, Colorado 51.75%, and New Mexico 11.25%. The lower basin is a little different. You notice it's divided based upon volumes of water. This determination was in about the 1928 time period. They felt they knew exactly how much water there was, and they divided the volumes of water up for a certain amount of use, for like 4.4 million acre-feet of use for California, the largest user in the basin, and 2.8 million acre-feet for Arizona, 0.3 million acre-feet for Nevada, only 300,000 acre-feet. We'll talk about that a little bit further, but this is an important concept because it is a source of some of the problems that exist in the Colorado River now. The upper basin is using about 4.5 million acre-feet today of the 7.5 million acre-feet promised in the Colorado River Compact. Now, what we've learned since 1922 is there's not quite as much water as they thought there was in 1922. The lower basin has developed all of their water supply based upon that 1922 allocation. The upper basin has developed slower, so we haven't developed all of our supply. And in fact, we've done studies to determine what the safe yield of the river is for the upper basin states. We think that might be more in the neighborhood of about 6 million acre-feet. But we're using 4.5, so we're still below that. There's still additional water, even with that more safe determination of how much water is available for our use. I also would like to mention that this map doesn't show the Green River, which would take off about right here and goes up into Wyoming and begins at Pinedale, Wyoming, right at the base of the Wind River Mountains. The Green River and the Colorado River are roughly the same size on average, Green River being just slightly smaller, but very important part. And Utah is blessed that the Green and Colorado Rivers traverse most of our state, so its availability and proximity to our state is better. So a word about what is the river's track record. The Colorado River during this period of time has gone through many periods of drought and wet periods. We've been in a particularly dry period since 2000, so the driest period that we've seen since we began keeping records. But we know from the study of tree rings, where we can interpret from those tree rings what the hydrology was in the past. We can go back several hundred years, and we can see that there have been droughts like we're in now with the Colorado River. There's been times when there have been significant droughts, but we're in a significant one. However, in both wet and dry cycles over the past century, the main stem of the Colorado River has always provided enough water to meet the established uses and the compact requirements. So there hasn't been a compact shortage in history to date. Recent modeling on the projected drought scenarios indicates that the river should be a reliable supply for the upper basin well into the future. The Bureau of Reclamation has conducted modeling that shows that there is almost no chance of compact curtailment through the period of about 2050. And if we assume that this drought continues that we have been experiencing since 2000, and a little bit of the hydrology before, there's a very, very low chance that there will be a shortage where we have a compact shortage in the Colorado River Basin, extremely low percent. So the Colorado has been reliable. There's been 92 million acre feet of water transferred from the Lake Powell to the lower basin over the past 10 years. The requirement of the compact is that we provide 75 million acre feet over any 10-year running period. So we're well above what the compact has required. Even in this drought period, the Colorado has continued to meet the requirements of the lower basin and then some with regards to what the compact calls for. I'd like to talk a little bit about the lower basin because this river is connected. The upper basin and lower basin are connected and work together. It's not quite the same situation at Lake Mead. Again, they developed much faster and are using all of the available supply promised by the Colorado River, but we really have a deficit of supply in the lower basin. That's not the case in the upper basin. And a lot of times when you hear the Colorado River is out of water, you're talking about the lower basin and their compact requirements. But you can see from this that the inflow of the Colorado River is about, into Lake Mead is about 9 million acre feet. And the outflow that goes to the 3 lower basin states in Mexico is about 9.6 million acre feet. And then they experience evaporation losses of about 600,000 acre feet per year. And that gives you a negative balance of 1.2 million acre feet. So when the compact delivery requirements are met, Lake Mead still has a tendency to go down. And this is a significant problem within the Colorado River Basin. It's one that we expect will have to be addressed by the lower basin states because they need to be able to get a handle on Lake Mead. The upper basin is still assured our share. The compact says 7.5. We have studied it. We think the safe yield is more like about 6. And the states in the upper basin are going to look at that carefully as they continue to develop the remaining available water supply in the Colorado River Basin. So we have the benefit of having developed slower. So a lot of concern has been expressed about climate variability and what does that mean for the Colorado River. The Bureau of Reclamation looked at this. They looked at all the climate studies, and you can find climate studies. There's a wide variation in results from climate studies, from it's going to be drier and less water to there's going to be actually more water available in the Colorado River. But the study people rely upon the most showed in 2012 there would be about a 9% reduction in supply over the next 50 years due to climate impacts if those models are correct. There's been additional climate studies that have come out since 2012 that showed that reduction may be less. But most of us in the Colorado River Basin for our planning are continuing to use the 9% reduction, even though the latest study showed more like a 5% reduction. And from this, the Bureau of Reclamation has modeled that there's near 0% chance of a compact shortage through 2050 if we assume that we continue to get the water supply that we've seen over the past 100 years. If we get a much drier water supply, more like what we've been seeing over the past 20 or 25 years, there is a small chance for a compact shortage to occur. It's a very low percent and a percentage that is manageable. It's an infrequent occurrence that could occur, and it's out a good number of years. So the lower basin has great concerns for the dropping in storage in Lake Mead. and the potential that there wouldn't be enough water provided under the compact allocation. The upper basin, there's a low risk, but even a low risk is worth planning for contingency and what would you do. And through the Department of Interior, the states, and Mexico, all the states in the Colorado River Basin have developed drought contingency plans. They've recently been ratified by Congress and signed by the President in a statute that was passed just a few months ago. And these plans are actions that the states take in terms of conservation or providing additional water from upstream reservoirs in order to keep the elevation of Lake Powell and Lake Mead from hitting critical low elevations under worst case scenarios. So a little, I guess it's worth talking even of the low probability that there would be a compact shortage over the next 25 years. If there were a compact shortage, the commission would simply determine the volume of water that we're short, and the requirement is that we have to supply a certain amount of water to the lower basin, and if we're unable to do that, we have to reduce our uses. Those uses would be reduced based upon determining a volume by the commission, but then each state would decide how to reduce uses in order to comply with the compact requirements. Again, the probability of this is low. This water supply is one of the few which provide such a low probability of risk and curtailment. I think with that, it's a good segue to go to Eric.
Thanks, Don. Can you hear me? Okay. So Don talked to you some about Utah's allocation in the Colorado River. We are entitled to 23% of the available water supply in the upper basin, and that translates to about 1.4 million acre feet each year. We're not using all of that at this point. We're using about 1 million acre feet, and so we've got about 400,000 acre feet left. If we look at this slide right here, it shows our uses. 63% is the actual use. The 9% is our piece of the evaporation off Lake Powell and the other reservoirs, as well as system losses. So you combine those all together to make that 1 million acre feet, and that is about 72%. So the remaining 28% is the 400,000 that we still have that we can develop. We have a couple of reserved water rights settlements with tribes, with the Navajo Nation and with the Ute tribe that we need to do. We also expect there will be some additional agricultural water uses, and we'll also have some additional municipal industrial water uses that would come out of that remainder, including the Lake Powell pipeline. And that is represented by that 6% wedge that's right there. The 6% represents about 86,000 acre feet, which is, you know, in terms of the whole system, relatively small. In fact, very small. It's less than 0.5% of the water that's available in Lake Powell. So one of the big questions that we get asked in regards to Lake Powell pipeline is whether the Colorado River truly is a reliable source of water for the project. And the answer to that is yes. So the questions come, you know, we know you have the water right, but if there was a shortage that was to occur, and Don talked some about that relative to this drought that we're in, that probably raises the attention of that most. But if we have a shortage and a curtailment of water, would we be able to fill Lake Powell? And we realize that Lake Powell would be one of the newest projects when it's built on the river system. In Utah, we think of water rights in terms of prior appropriation doctrine, first in time, first in right. And the question is that how the Lake Powell Pipeline project would be viewed? And the answer to that is no. The compacts, the Colorado River Compact, does not work under that prior appropriation doctrine. It realized that some of the states would develop faster than others. Utah is one of the ones that still has not fully developed its allocation, and so that compact has protected us, and the Lake Powell Pipeline project therefore is not subject to being reduced because of that first in time, first in right concept. So Utah is not using its full apportionment of the upper basin states, which are, well, let's see, New Mexico is probably the closest to doing that. Colorado would be next, probably Utah after that, and then Wyoming. So if a declared shortage were to occur, there are some actions that would need to be taken to divide up any shortfall that might come, and I think Don described that well. The Upper Colorado River Commission, which represents Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah, their representatives would meet together with the technical staff and decide how much should each state be cut back because of this shortage that might possibly occur. With that, then each state would have direction as to how much it needed to cut back, and then those cutbacks would be done by the state engineer's office, deciding where and who and when should those cuts be made. So, again, we assert that Lake Powell pipeline can be served reliably and well by the Colorado River system. The main stem of the Green and Colorado rivers, and there's a lot of water that flow through those, have never had a priority cut by the state engineer's office due to shortage. Again, if a shortage were to occur, each state would determine how the water users would have that cut apportioned among themselves. So a few points here. If there was a shortage declared, and one that the governor declared as a shortage, it is anticipated that basic municipal and domestic needs would take priority under certain circumstances. Also, we assume that any interruption that would occur would be a temporary interruption, and that Washington County and Kane County could rely on other measures in the interim to help fill the need. We don't see that if there was a shortage that all of the Lake Powell pipeline water would be cut. There would probably be some water that would still be available for the project, yet there would be a gap that would need to be filled. So with that, we think that there is no imminent threat right now, given the things that Don told you about how far ahead we are in our deliveries to the lower basin, as well as the modeling that's been done. We don't see any threat to the Lake Powell pipeline, and even in the long term, we think that the threat is minimal, and that the district has plans in place that will help fill those gaps. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ron.
Thank you, Eric and Don. I probably shouldn't make this comment, because it's commenting on the structural deficit issue in the lower Colorado River, but just think of the 17 million acre foot over the last decade extra that we have sent to the lower Colorado River that belong to the upper basin. And look at Lake Powell, it stores 24 million acre foot of water, and it has about 9 or 10 million in it today. And what that 17 million would mean if it was kept up here instead of sending it someplace else. And so when people say this system's going dry, and I'd say, au contraire, it's not going dry, we just need to manage it better. And some areas need to manage better than others. Now, regarding the Lake Powell pipeline project, I'm going to give you a very brief summary. It will deliver 86,249 acre feet of water to southwest Utah. It comes through a 140-mile pipeline. There will be a spur taking part of the water into the Kanab area of King County, and there are 5 pump stations and 6 hydropower plants. This project will lift the water about 2,000 feet out of Lake Powell and then drop it into the Sand Hollow Reservoir complex about 3,000 feet. So this hydropower becomes an important source of taking advantage of the head that will be available and hopefully offsetting some of the operating costs of the project. Now, as you know, if you've been here very long, this county continues to grow exponentially. When I came here out of school in the early 1970s, there was about 13,000 people. Today, there's about 170,000. Today, we have 6 million tourists that come through a year. 20% of our resident population or residential units are owned by people who don't claim this as their primary residence. So there are a lot of things that are going on in this community that are different than maybe many other metropolitan areas, particularly in the Utah area. So when we look in the water industry as to how do we project what we ought to do, you always worry because I don't care what the model is, there's a saying that all models are wrong, some are useful. And I would just share a couple of observations. When I came here, this county was fairly small. They were just expanding the hospital from 30 beds to 65. That happened in 1974. That was supposed to last, according to the studies and the models, till 2020. Well, within a year or a year and a half, every bed in that hospital was full. And I don't know how many times since it was turned over to Intermountain Healthcare have they expanded, but can you imagine if we had to get biomedical services on what the models initially told us would be there in the early 1970s? And that's just one of lots of models. We usually rely in Utah on models put out by the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. And they're getting better, but they're not perfect. And particularly when you try to look through an hourglass that's 50 years in the horizon. There are some things I think that in fact do drive a model like in a community like ours. One is we have world-class geography. 2 is we have world-class people. 3 is we have great medical facilities. We have good transportation system. We have 9 months of heaven and 3 months of fair hereafter. So, you know, we got a lot of things that probably continue to drive this growth as we move into the future. I'll just put this up so you can get some idea. Between 2010 and 2020, it's projected that the U.S. population will grow by 8.1%, the state by about 11%, or 19%, and Washington County by 34% in the decade that will end at 2020. As you can see, and this has been a constant trend, we will outpace, or projected to outpace, the state's growth by about double, and the state will outpace the national growth by about double. So when you look at the current population forecast, they're projecting a population of over 500,000 by 2060. Now, I put that a little in perspective. I've been here long enough to watch these models. I can tell you in my nearly 40-year career, I've seen the models underestimate our population growth all but one time, and sometimes by a significant amount. This model, for the first time, which I think is a plus, has a high and a low range. So you gives you something to plan around that so allows you to be more adaptive in your planning process. Lake Powell certainly helps us meet the long-term needs. Our long-term Anticipated demand will have Lake Powell providing over time about 42% of our water supply. You'll see in there that there's agricultural conversion, there's conservation and reuse, and of course our existing supplies. All of those are important to meet the long-term goal, and conservation certainly is a big part of that. Today we have invested over the last 30 years over $60 million in projects that have allowed us to conserve significant quantities and use the water we have better and wiser without significant waste. It's 60 to approximately 140,000 acre-foot of water. Much of that will have to come from the Lake Powell project. Now, what does the Colorado River do for an area like this basin that we live in here in Washington County? As you look around, you'll see that Washington County is dependent on the Virgin River, except for a small little sliver that's up in the Enterprise area that's in the Great Basin. It's a single source supply, and when you talk about variability, you can see if you looked last year, one of the 2 driest years of the 100-year record. This year, one of the 5 wettest years of the 100-year record. It's an interesting system, but if how many here are tied at all to the Santa Clara system? Well, several of you. If you've watched the Santa Clara, and Scott, you have, you'll know in the last decade, every year there's been a shortage in that system except for what we project this year and in 2011. And just to give you a feel, and this is not just the Santa Clara, but that river has a high flow historically of 77,000 acre feet, a low flow of 4, an average flow of 12, but a median flow of 8,000 acre foot of water. So you look at that tremendous variability. The Virgin River is similar to that. So in the Virgin River, when we look at an average flow, we figured out that average occurs 2 out of 10 years. Think of that, only 2 out of 10 years. So when people start building water supplies on average, you're going to have a deficit in 8 of those 10 years. So you have to plan better than that in terms of how much risk you're willing to put society at. So the fact that we have only one source is troubling to a water manager. It will become more troubling in the future as we continue to harden our water supply and grow. Over time, no matter where you're at, and I suppose in society, we talk about the need for redundancy in our systems. And we certainly have tried to build that in both our treatment and our well system, and development of springs and transmission. But the need to develop additional water supplies is just as important, if not more important, than the local redundancy that we've built into our systems. It certainly allows us to take the risk of impacting our economy by running out of water. Can you imagine what would happen in this county the day you go turn on the tap and you can't get water, or the day, and most won't remember this, but I remember as a small child, probably 9, coming often to St. George to visit with grandparents that lived out on the east side of town. In the 50s, we went through an extremely significant drought. The springs quit running, which is the primary supply, or what dropped way down, the supply of the St. George area. You did not water lawn. You'd be hard-pressed to find a green blade of grass. You were given tickets if you were caught washing your car. You were given tickets if you caught water in your yard. I remember coming from Cedar City, where I was being raised, and my grandparents would not let you turn on the tap to get water. You had to go to the fridge, take out the pitcher, pour your glass, put it back. Now, can you imagine what life would be like if we went back to that? Or do we want to take those kinds of risks? I think probably not. And we have an economy that's dependent on that, and I'll just share just some thoughts that I think we ought to be looking at. When we built Quail Creek in the early 1980s, we had 27,000 people in the county at that time, so we'd more than doubled from the 1970s. We had a $100 million tax base. We built a project that was going to cost $30 million. And the state played a major role in the financing of that project. Today, what does our economy look like? We have nearly an $18+ billion tax base. We have 170,000 people that live here permanently. We have an economy producing $4.5+ billion of gross domestic product. None of that could have happened had we not built the water infrastructure we have here today. And none of what our future potential is going to be, our needs for our kids, could happen if we don't continue to diversify and build water supply that protects this economy and protects future generations. I think it's true that these systems have performed certainly well for us in the past. There's no reason to expect they won't perform well in the future. It doesn't mean we need to use the resource better. I'm reminded of an adage. I was talking to a water superintendent in Tucson, and I initially wanted talking about the conservation programs. And he laughed and he says, we really only have 2 adages down here. I said, what's that? And he said, we protect the water we have and we go get more. And you look at their growth and you can see why they're still going and getting more. Certainly, there's no place in our society today that we're not dependent on having an adequate and reasonable supply of water, not only for those who are here today, but sustain this economy and generations in the future. That's the business of what the district's about. Again, I'd like to thank Don and Eric for coming down. I think we're ready to take questions. Yes.
Ron.
That's up north, but the first one that's ever been built in Utah is the one that's here with St. George City. The thing you have to remember to have reclaimed water is you better have water first. So if you look at our long-term supply and you look at the graph we had on, you'll see that Lake Powell reuse, that 11%, that's totally dependent on Lake Powell being there and our intent to reclaim that water, treat it, and reuse it, and mix and blend it into our system. It's going to be a long-term, very important component of this. Next question. Yes, Tom.
The Lake Powell bank seems to be going down though over the years and not coming back up. Are there plans to utilize that lake and make more water, or is that because of the demand of the lower Colorado River that probably won't happen?
Well, thank heavens we have that storage. If we didn't have it, we'd be out of water right now. That's what's allowed us to get through this drought without having to have shortages and curtailment. So thank heavens it was there, and we've needed all of it, all of Lake Mead and Lake Powell to be able to do that. We think that the future you will see Lake Powell rise again. I don't subscribe to the fact that we'll never see more water in Lake Powell. I mentioned one thing that has to change is that as long as we're operating in tandem with the lower basin on Lake Mead with our operating rules to keep them roughly the same elevation, they have got to address the structural deficit. If they want us to continue to operate like that, they have got to address the continual decline of Lake Mead when it gets a normal compact supply. And there's a lot of discussion that's been had with them. I think they've taken the first step to get that under control by developing drought contingency plans where they will take shortages when Lake Mead gets to certain elevations. That gets you part way there. They need a permanent long-term solution, which means they're going to have to adjust their water use, adjust their agricultural water use and transfer some to municipal and do that. But it's possible for them to do it. They can desalt additional ocean water in California. So once that is fixed, then I think Lake Powell will become more stable and more susceptible to significant rises when we have a year like this without having to send excess water to Lake Mead. But that's critical. And if that is done, then I think you'll see Lake Powell begin to increase in storage.
Can I ask a question on that? So what would be their incentive to do that if they can just take it from Lake Powell?
Well, I think the incentive is this operating procedure has to be beneficial to all 7 states. And if because of their overuse and failure to account for evaporation, it's creating a deficit in the upper basin, then the upper basin may no longer be willing to continue that operation. In December of 2012, 2020, discussions are going to begin on whether and how to continue that operational procedure. And part of those discussions absolutely will be, you need to find some way to begin to address the structural deficit, because it's taking the benefits that the Upper Basin expected to see from this type of operation, and they're not there anymore. And so some changes will have to be made. That's the leverage. The Upper Basin does not have to agree to continue that operation after 2026. That's something that we negotiated amongst the 7 Colorado River Basin states, and they need to come to an agreement. And that'll be part of that discussion.
Let's see, I had a question over here from Steve Wade, then we'll come back here.
I'm old enough to remember quite a few years ago, Jim Hansen was touting the fact that a lot of people in the East, Congressmen, were trying to close Lake Valley. There was a lot pushed there. Is that gone? Is all that concern from environmentalists trying to even shut it down? Do you think that's mute?
We still hear things. There's a Phil Mead first proposal that was out there that really would have the effect of draining Powell down to the power pool and making it really ineffective as a reservoir. I think there's, scientist Jack Schmidt from USU did a pretty thorough and good investigation to show that the benefits that the environmental groups were hoping to get from that would never materialize. And neither the upper or the lower basin want to lose that storage that's in Powell. It's valuable to all of us.
Could I just ask one more question? Where's the cost now? I mean, if you have to go ahead right now, where do you think you are, Ron, as far as pulling this off?
Well, I think we're about 1.4 billion, at least that's the engineer's estimate. Do I think if we were able to start it today, we'd build it for less? The answer is yes, and I'm not going to go all the details,
Yeah.
but that's got a significant contingency in it, it's what you should have at this stage of the game. But till you get the final record decision, which hopefully will happen in 2020, and can move into a final design, you're just guessing where those costs are going to be.
Those B numbers, they're make you shake your head, me anyway, those billions. You feel like this is no problem with the feasibility of it all?
Well, let's kind of put this in perspective. If this community could pay for a $30 million project on a $100 million tax base, why couldn't we pay for a $1.4 billion project on a nearly $19 billion tax base? If we could pay for it with 27,000 people, why can't we pay for it with a 170,000 population expected to grow to 500? I think the answer to all those is we can. The question is, what priority do you put on water versus something else? I submit, when you put all the cards out there, I have this kind of rule of threes that drive me. One is, I know that if I don't have air for 3 minutes, I'm probably going to die. I know if I don't have water for 3 days, I'm going to die. If I don't have food, I'm probably going to die in 3 weeks. So I want to make sure those 3 things are pretty stable. I don't want any of them to go away. Then I can worry about buying cars from Stephen Wade and others.
I appreciate that worry.
Let's see, I had a question right here.
Well, and I'd like to add on to an additional question that the gentleman just kind of brought up. They're kind of tied together. So you were talking about the amount of allocation that goes down the river that's ours that we don't use, and we just let it flow down the river. And obviously they're not, my opinion is they're not doing much, if anything, to really curtail that. They just will take the free water, and I'm in Vegas all the time. I know what's pretty much going on there. It's just business as usual. And so do we get paid for, are we charging for that allocation that we're sending down the river? And if not, why not?
No, we are not getting any sort of compensation for that, and should we? I don't know that we'd be able to and be helpful, that would be a helpful thing for us. We really want them to fix the structural deficit. And about 5 years ago in Las Vegas, I heard someone from the lower basin, and this is the first time I'd heard it, say, we've got to fix the structural deficit. So they want to fix that. They realize that in order for them to continue to be able to survive with the river, that they need to do that. And as Don mentioned, if they don't, we may not always play well with them. And we've got this opportunity to fix the guidelines here over the next 6 years, and we're certainly going to work to do that and make sure that we're all living within our budget.
Well, I have found that a financial incentive always works, always.
Okay.
And so you can say, I'm gonna do this, or you can say, well, if you don't do this, it's gonna cost you $1 million. Guess what? You got my attention. The second part of that goes back to the cost. So we've estimated 1.1 to 1.8 billion, but that's just to build the project. We're gonna finance this over, what, 50 years? I'd like to know what the all-in total cost would be, just like when I buy a house. $150,000 for the house, but I'm gonna pay more than that in interest. So what's the all-in complete price of this project?
Well, obviously working on a finance plan. It depends on whether the state follows the current statute, which if it does, it's gonna be significantly less, or if we're gonna have to find some other financing model. It's likely if you end up like a home, you're gonna double the cost in it with the interest. No question about that.
That's for 30 years. This is for
Yeah.
50 years.
Well, yeah, but you look at our growth and how we plan to pay for it, and I suspect it'll happen earlier. The question really is, I hear this, let's not build like Powell, but fundamentally, the chief proponents are no-growthers. And I know they take great offense at that, but it still is a fact that when I listen to the major proponents, if we're growing too fast, we need to use water to slow it down. I'm fine with that, but I want a place for my grandkids who live here to be able to raise their families here. I don't care quite as much as somebody came from California and wants to be here so they can live out their last years, but that's just me. I don't know how everybody else feels, but, and I'm being more blunt than I normally would be, but that's because I'm retired and I'm going to take the heat for saying what I think.
Well, I'm already retired, and so I'm like you. I speak my mind even when I was working. But here's the point. I didn't say a word about growth. You're the one that brought, these no growth. I'm not talking about growth. Mine is purely a financial question. How much is this going to cost us? I see we're going to get $1.4 billion from property taxes. Now, is that all considered from growth of it, or how much is that going to come out of the people who are already here? I'm interested in the dollar value of this, and I know we keep saying, well, we can't really nail it down, and that's true. But we can start talking about what the interest rates are going to be on the bonds or on the, however we're going to finance this. I wish we would start talking about real numbers instead of this really low ball, 1.5 billion. It's going to be way more than that, and I'd just like to know how much.
Well, before we build it, we will certainly have those figures hard. But I can tell you, every project we've done, we have this same discussion. What's it only going to cost? Until you get the design and the bids and you look at what you got to finance, that's a difficult, especially with projects where the cost estimates have a 30 or 40% contingency in it. So we'll get there. We do have a plan where we plan to both pay for some of this project with property tax, some out of rates, and some out of impact fees. We're starting to implement that today so that we're in a position to move forward as we land this project. We have a statute that lays out a financing plan inside of it. It actually has some subsidized interest in it that the legislature said is going to be there. We'll see whether that lasts or whether it will ultimately be amended when we get further down the road. It's always interesting that you have a lot of people who want to be policymakers that aren't legislators. We'll see what the legislator ultimately says, who's the ultimate policymaker in this instance. Today they said, here's our model, here's the project, we're going to build it this way. We expect it will be built that way because we don't have any other thing that gives us some different direction. So that's where we see this project going.
Just a
Yes.
few more questions. We've got Mari, we've got this gentleman here, but we said we would leave at 1, and so can we just wrap up with those 2 questions? And then if you have additional questions, the panel members will be here and they're happy to talk to you. But I want to make sure that the rest of you that have other commitments, we're so grateful that you're here. Thank you for being here, but we won't keep you anymore. We'll have Mari and then one more question, and then the board will stay up for other questions afterwards.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for hosting these meetings, we really appreciate it. I personally, I represent the building industry, and we want to go on record to say that we are in support of the Lake Powell pipeline. Definitely, we need a second water source, and absolutely, Impact East should pay a portion of the Lake Powell pipeline. We recognize that as well. You know, of course, the hot topic lately is housing affordability, and so as we know, impact fees as they go up, they're passed on to people that are going to purchase the home. Is there any talk about including federal dollars to help offset some of these costs? I know the legislature is in support of the pipeline, but financially, is the state of Utah also going to contribute so that we don't overburden the building industry with excessively high impact fees?
So I'll take that last question. So the state actually has a couple processes going on. Right now, a couple years ago, the governor's office put together an executive water finance board that is looking at how the state should be involved in the financing of big projects such as Lake Powell Pipeline Project, and what other sources could help contribute to the cost, including federal sources. And so those are things that are being looked at. I think it was, I don't remember when it was, time goes by so fast, that board was down here last fall, I believe, and had a meeting and listened and took note, and I think we've had a couple meetings down here actually to talk about those things. So that's going on. The legislature also required that we put out a RFP to get a consultant to help us look again at ways that we could finance big projects like this one.
And that includes looking at federal sources,
Yes.
just to try to, yes.
What's the working relationship like between the upper and lower basin? Is there any risk of legal action or a fight come 2026?
I would say, so I'm the governor's representative on Colorado River matters, and so I do meet with the other 6 states, and I would say, and everybody says that the working relationship right now is as good as it's ever been. Trying to cooperatively work through things and identify the things that need to be fixed. But yeah, each state and each basin have their own interests that we're all trying to look out for, and we'll do that as we get into the negotiations on the redoing of the guidelines.
I think we better wrap it up because like I said, I don't want to keep anybody past their hour. If you have additional questions, please come talk to the panel directly, and they know everything, and they're happy to stay as long as you need. But for the rest of you that need to get back to work, thank you so much for being here. If you did not sign in, please sign in before you leave. We want to keep a record of everybody's who's here. Thank you for being here.